Hi, everybody. I'm Ravi Kapur. We're joined by Sai Deepak, who is here back at the Stanford campus to speak before the students at their annual India conference. Second appearance in as many years. They clearly liked what you had to say a year ago. And we had a conversation last year about what was going on politically in India and in the U.S. And obviously things have changed since our last conversation here. Of course, in the United States, we have a new administration. India at that time, I think we had spoken just before the Indian election, and Prime Minister Modi was reelected, but with less of a mandate potentially than what some people anticipated. So give me your perspective on India the last 12 months and America the last 12 months. Obviously, we're in the middle of another situation that just took place between India and Pakistan, obviously the terrorism attack in Kashmir, which is also as we film this, who knows what the next step will be. But a lot has happened since we had a last chance to have a conversation.
So I think obviously the results of May 2024 were not as sunny as perhaps the ruling party would have expected it. But the fact of the matter is, for them to be re-elected for the third time, and the magic number for you to cross the majority in the Indian Parliament is 272, and for them to have got 240 again in the third round, and with two more coalition partners chipping in, I think they've managed to cobble together a stable government. The good part is this is not let's call it a rainbow coalition in the sense that people with diametrically opposite views populate the same space. These are partners who have been previously the coalition partners of the very same dispensation as part of the larger National Democratic Alliance. And they have been partners at least for over 2 decades. So they are largely on the same page with respect to the basic ideas which drive their respective manifestos on development, infrastructure, so on and so forth. And even on ideological lines, they're not vastly different, except that perhaps the nuance, the degree, and the directness with which they approach those issues may differ. So in that sense, I think the BJP has been blessed with coalition partners who will not throw a spanner in the works. The good part is the elections of May 2024 did not result in a continuing spree of some kind of decline in the BJP's fortunes on, let's say, at the state level. In the state elections in major states like Maharashtra and other states, they've managed to perform really, really well. Now, this is not because I'm a supporter of the BJP. I see myself as a votary with very clear independent views. There are issues on which I've criticized them, of course. But there is a certain policy continuity that is required both at the state level and the central level, because India's growth story needs to be driven at least for another generation before we finally can sit back and say, okay, we've done something. There's a lot more to be done. And unfortunately, even if I say so myself, and I don't take pride in saying this, I haven't seen a quality opposition come up against the BJP at the central level, which is offering a different version of the very same growth story. But instead they subscribe to a Fabian model of economics, which also survives on a lot of freebies, which I think is a drain on India's resources. The BJP is not fully free of the freebie culture, but what it does is that it tries to use the rising tide on the one hand and also redistribute it on the other to be able to satisfy, let's say, some of India's standard expectations from an electoral perspective. So in that sense, I think it's been a different kind of journey for the BJP compared to what it has had prior to 2024. Now, coming to the American front, I think I am not a local, so obviously my views are that of an outsider. And I don't know if I can speak from a position of knowledge or experience. All I can say is perhaps America has finally had enough of extreme political correctness, and they wanted someone who could shoot straight. Now, whether he's shooting right or wrong, that's for time to decide. But someone at least who speaks his mind as opposed to beating around the bush, wears his position on his sleeve, and focuses on the basics which he thinks are good for his country, as opposed to focusing on making America the global policeman. So these are certain aspects which I think which have animated the American elections. Two, as someone who's been a distant observer, I don't think the Democrats presented the best of candidates as an option. It was, according to me, a pathetic option which could not have inspired confidence even in the most hardcore of Democratic supporters, who's looking for an intelligent person to be fielded, who's articulate, who has an independent point of view on major subjects, and who has something more to offer than a cackle and a laugh. Okay, so my apologies for being rude on this front, or perhaps harsh, but the American public perhaps deserved a better opposition or a better candidate from the Democratic front or from the side of the Democrats compared to what was presented. And it's not as if they're short on people. It makes very little sense, and I don't think anybody should say that you should run down the entire party or write them off. You could have done better. Then perhaps the choices would have been fairly real. Frankly speaking, the choice was not just unreal, but fairly clear, given the kind of person that was fielded from the Democratic side. 3, what has happened thereafter is perhaps a hit reset button being set by the Trump administration on certain aspects, from international treaties to, let's say, participation in global wars or participation on certain fronts, so to speak. That, I think, is a tempering effect which most people don't wish to associate with the gentleman himself. Sometimes I think it helps to focus on what someone says and focus on what someone does, to understand clearly as to what are the long-term impacts of their policy decisions. For far too long, I think American politics in general, which may be reflective of global politics, has been driven by the cosmetics of articulation and performance as opposed to the delivery itself. What has a person done? What did they promise? Did they deliver the goods? As opposed to whether they're good at making glib statements in public. Okay, so those considerations have taken the backseat once more. I could be way off the mark, but as an outsider, this is my reading of the situation.
A lot there to digest. And certainly when it comes to Kamala Harris, she was the first Indian American presidential candidate. But if you look at the data, and I'm still trying to uncover the real data, and I'm going to get that hopefully for our audience, but Hillary Clinton back in 2016 got 78% of the Indian American vote. And the numbers, at least early stages, people are telling me maybe she lost 20, 30% of that vote. So maybe it's in that 50, 55% range. But to lose that much support from her own community, ostensibly, is stunning.
Because we are keen to call her an Indian American, but I don't think she was particularly keen about highlighting her identity. And I don't think she came across as an authentic person in the eyes of either of the vote banks, either the African American vote bank or the Indian American vote bank. I think people do not want someone faking an identity on the basis of self-identification. At least say something that is of consequence to people. But if you have reduced all their expectations to race and identity, then you're doing grave injustice to their primary expectations, which is of a decent life, of law and order. And the unfortunate reality over the last decade or so, or maybe at least half a decade, is the association of the Democratic Party with poor law and order and a laissez-faire approach to issues of border control. That, I think, forget from the perspective of protecting the borders of America, even if you're looking at it from a hard-nosed political perspective, those were clear suicidal positions. They could never take a consistent position. They would swing. Their positions would constantly swing like a pendulum. And 3, in the process, I think you handed the advantage to the opposite side. On matters of national integrity, I don't think any party should take a politically correct position. Be clear, be ruthless. That's the only way the job gets done. Because if the borders are safe, then you have a country. If you have a country, then you have a future. Then you can sit and fight over what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is left. But if the borders themselves become porous and you get taken over by silent invasion, then what are you exactly talking about? What are you fighting for?
Well, I do want to get into the border situation going on in India. But before I do that, obviously, when we spoke, there was a huge amount of ruckus over our borders here, and we had a situation where there were protests and referendum movements by people supporting Khalistan. Now, things have changed now. There was actually a big arrest made by Kash Patel and company. And in fact, I actually had a chance to talk to the California Attorney General in an interview that we're just about to release, and he does not appear to have awareness of that sting operation that the FBI conducted to arrest recently in Sacramento a man associated with the Khalistan movement. So the national government, the federal government, is moving at a different rate, and some of the law enforcement officials, even in a place like California, weren't even aware of this going on.
Right. Perhaps because I think some of the state governments may or may not be sympathetic to some of these separatist movements. And since relationship with India happens to be a foreign policy issue, it makes abundant sense for the federal government to take a position on it and crack down on these pro-Khalistan elements if they have, and since they have, a direct bearing on the health of the relationship between India and America. And given the kind of threats they pose to Hindus here, in general Sikhs also here, peace-loving Sikhs here, patriotic Sikhs here, I think it's important that the federal government shows that it means business and addresses some of those concerns, because they are not commercial concerns. They're concerns relating to national identity, integrity, borders, and the security of people who live here, our own people who live here. So if this was done sub silentio, under the radar, without the knowledge of the Californian agencies, perhaps there's a good reason for it.
Well, this is also fascinating because we do have just a change in policy, right? So Biden leaves, Trump comes in, Trump uses hefty rhetoric on India, the tariff situation. But meanwhile, there are a lot of Indian Americans that did vote for Trump thinking he was going to close these borders, he was going to crack down on some of these policies. We had a caste discrimination law that was nearly passed. I mean, it was passed in California, vetoed by Governor Newsom, who has presidential aspirations. Of course, you've had this, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Indians crossing the border, claiming asylum, or some people just staying here illegally. Give me a sense of how India feels now that Trump has come into power, and that change and just change in approach overall between Biden and Trump.
So, as someone who observes these issues, I can at least safely say India has very little interest in meddling with the internal political choices of any other country, either as an establishment or as a society. What we certainly care for is whether the dispensation that comes to power in United States of America, considering its position as the sole surviving superpower, what does it bode for our geopolitical interests? What does it bode for the, let's say, accommodation of talent that flows from Bharat to, or India to America? What does it mean for the security and safety of Indian Americans in America? What does it mean for the kind of support or, let's say, assistance that we can expect on issues of common interest, such as dealing with common challenges such as China, the troubled, let's say, neighborhood that we live in, then Islamofascism in that particular sense, which is a growing problem both in Europe, America, and of course in India. And what does it mean for tech transfer? What does it mean for our collaboration on sensitive areas such as artificial intelligence, now that China has a system to compete with? That's what we are interested in. On question of, let's say, tariffs, I think what Mr. Trump is doing is perhaps in the best interest of his country, or if he's playing to his own gallery, I'm sure he's surrounded by advisors who will ask him to tone down the rhetoric if it backfires. I'm not going to use one tariff decision to decide whether the relationship between India and America has been jeopardized by the Trump administration, because it's a multifaceted relationship. And sometimes geopolitics and national security matter more than tariffs. And perhaps on tariff, it's always possible to negotiate down, or we have our own response mechanisms, or we have our own ways of cushioning ourselves from the blow. But what cannot be negotiated on, and the line that we draw in the sand, is with respect to issues of security. Let's say, race for resources, whether it is minerals that are used for mobile phones and whatnot, those are aspects that we certainly want to be a part of. Considering that we haven't exactly found an ally in China, and it refuses to see value in collaborating with India and you can even compete with India, but you don't need to be a bully. And that is something that China has refused to understand and learn ever since 1962, or ever since the Maoist regime. So the relationship with America needs to be understood on a broader level, because I think it is possible for both societies as well as the state to collaborate with each other without there being too much of a conflict on basic values, wherever or whatever the source of those values may be. And therefore, in my view, I certainly welcome this administration for one clear reason. It doesn't vacillate on its position with respect to India's national security, speaks its mind on the subject, especially on issues such as Khalistanism and the terrorism, cross-border terrorism that Pakistan conducts in Kashmir and other parts of India. So on these issues, what they say makes a lot more difference to us. For instance, if you see the position of Ms. Tulsi Gabbard, when the CAA was promulgated, she was among the first persons to come out with a very clear position as to why she defends it, and she did not see that as some kind of an Islamophobic piece of legislation. She understood the historical context of it. And since those kind of voices have been populated by this establishment, it makes a lot more sense for us to see a much more sympathetic establishment compared to the previous establishment.
Now, there is like a transnational repression bill that has been introduced here in California, introduced by certain elements, obviously, that are pushing back on China, but ostensibly India. There's a lot of that pushback. Do you hear about some of these local level bills that get introduced? Obviously, there are foreign elements that may
Not
be
yet.
contributing.
Not yet. I don't think they have managed to percolate our discussions yet. Not yet. And which is why I said that sometimes most of these discussions are about macro issues and at a macro level. Unless someone takes a very keen interest on the ground realities here and the nuts and bolts of it, not yet. To be honest, I must plead ignorance on the subject.
Understood. And this is a new thing. It's being introduced in California, but obviously there's pushback, much like the caste discrimination bill. But all these dichotomies, I mean, we're having to pay attention to the diaspora out of Canada, out of the UK, and here in the United States, because all of it seems to go back to India and Pakistan, the conflict that continues even to a lesser degree Bangladesh. Give me your thoughts on the terrorist attack and what India's response should be, knowing that there are people that have been devastated by what took place.
One, this was not a religion-neutral terrorist attack, that much is clear, because the modus operandi clearly reveals that they identified the victims on the basis of markers on their body. And to strip the people first to identify their religion and then to shoot them dead. If someone tells me of all the tourists or the people who were killed, one of them was a Muslim, apparently the reason why he was shot dead was because he was mistaken for a Hindu. That's the reason. So with this kind of hatred that comes from across the border, which is taught in seminaries all over Pakistan, I think it's time to keep the political correctness filter aside and call it for what it is, which is Islamofascism. And that kind of terrorism, that kind of terror must be dealt with an iron fist. And mere economic sanctions are not going to be sufficient. The only language that country and that mindset understands is the use of force, and perhaps even disproportionate force. That's the only way they will learn the lesson. Because we've been taking punches from them for quite some time without even responding. The first time India started responding with some degree of seriousness to terrorism was post-2014. Until then, it responded only to conventional war, but not to terror attacks. Now I think it's time to dismember that country called Pakistan, because it's an artificial and synthetic product. It's a synthetic product of colonization. It needs to go. And given that it has enough elements within which don't want to be a part of the Pakistani state anymore, I think you should find every way to dismember, denuclearize that state, and bring it down to its knees until the population rebels against the generals and tells them enough is enough, allow us to live. I am not going to give the Pakistani population a clean sheet or a free pass on this, because they're as complicit. They are the ones who provide the cannon fodder. If the cannons are prepared by the generals, the fodder comes from the Pakistani society, the Pakistani Muslim society. And I think we are done putting up with this. At least people from my generation are done, because we have seen Kargil, we have seen multiple terror attacks, A for Ahmedabad, B for Bombay, C for Calcutta. That's how we've learnt it, right? We will not put up with it anymore. And the steps that have been taken by the Indian government, I hope, are just the beginning, because I certainly would want to see some military action that results in teaching Pakistan a lesson of a lifetime and results in pushing Pakistan to the brink of extinction as a state. That is something I'm serious about, because if India has to rise, it has to rise peacefully. It needs to put down this irritant and this nuisance called Pakistan, and whoever supports Pakistan, regardless of where they live, within or outside India.
Very strong words. Obviously, most people, at least that I know, that are Hindus are very peaceful, generally not advocating for war.
We are peaceful, we are not pacifist. There's a difference.
I mean, this is a change. Obviously, historically, I know growing up in this country, India has always been very proud of not instigating wars. So you're advocating for, I mean, in a sense, India
instigating war. I'm asking for war because the instigation has been provided by the other side. They've given us enough provocation. So now you have pushed us to the wall. I think we should say, while we are all for peace, if our endeavors and overtures for peace are mistaken and equated with weakness, then we need to tell you that we are not the land of Gandhi. We are the land of Maharana Pratap. And response will come.
Now, Israel, obviously, that conflict continues with Hamas. They responded effectively immediately. So what is taking up? It's been a few days and it's still early stages, but what is the calculus going on with the Indian cabinet?
I don't know, but the one thing I have to immediately point out is most people have a tendency to equate the Israel-Palestine situation with the India-Pakistan situation. They are not the same. There may be common challenges, but the histories are very different. The situations are very different. The circumstances are very different. So Palestine is no Pakistan and India is no Israel. And whichever way the chips may fall on that comparison, I stand by that statement. I am of the clear view that the Indian government will respond in some way because there's a lot of anger back home. I actually asked myself the purpose of coming for this particular trip because I didn't see the point in delivering a lecture on constitutionalism when people are being killed. And we are back to the situation of 26/11 when more than 200 people or 160 people were mowed down by a bunch of thugs from Pakistan on the streets of Bombay. Some of us grew with those memories, and we at least swore to ourselves never again. Now that they have forced this decision upon us, at least I will certainly actively call for war. I am not a peacenik. I am not a warmonger. But if I do feel that our position is being mistaken for weakness, we will push for it. And people like me, with some degree of let's say, voice, will use our platforms to say, respond in a language that Pakistan and its people remember for generations. And this must be put an end to it because Pakistan, my apologies for saying so, at this point is behaving like a rabid dog. And the only way to treat a rabid dog is to put it down.
What accountability do you correlate with the Indian government? Obviously, there was an intelligence failure to have so many people infiltrate the country, whether they were locals or I still don't know fully where these people were, but how did so many people get killed in one scenario?
So I've been asked this question before on social media. The thing is, if you keep your doors open and a thief enters, sure, you must introspect as to how did this happen, but that gives no free pass or clean chit to the thief. So right now, I will focus on the fact that my people were killed by a terrorist from across the border. I will hold my government accountable after they have dealt with the situation. It's not as if the people of India are going to give the government of India a free pass on this. It's not as if they're going to let this slide. But that comes later. What kind of failures were responsible for this? We will come to that question. But before that, the fact that somebody has the temerity and the guts to attack India through terrorism in 2025, that notion has to be addressed. After that, we'll discuss the how do we put the house in order back.
You saw President Trump's response. He basically alluded to India and Pakistan fighting for thousands of years. Obviously,
he's referring to a civilizational conflict.
Yeah. In a sense, I think the way I interpret it is that he's going to kind of stand back and let India and Pakistan settle their own differences. What was your reaction to that? And where should the U.S. be, given the fact that they maintain a relationship? They've given, obviously, a lot of financial aid and weapons to Pakistan historically, and obviously now they have a strong relationship with India.
I hope they freeze the maintenance package for the aircraft that I think that has received the blessings of the American Parliament to Pakistan. I hope they freeze that at this moment. But as long as America takes a hands-off approach and stays out of this, I think that's good enough for us. Because what should have been settled in 1999 was brought to a standstill only because of the Clinton administration's interference in Kargil. If that hadn't happened, perhaps we could have actually taken the issue to its logical conclusion when they had infiltrated our territory. And I hope this time they stay out and they let us deal with Pakistan in a way we deem fit.
And what do you actually think can take place here? Obviously, we saw what happened in Bangladesh back in 1971. What will happen? Obviously, there's the Punjabi element, right? That was just kind of divided up into. I mean, where do you see this actually going if you actually go to war with Pakistan to the degree that you're
genuinely don't know. I honestly don't have an intelligent opinion on that particular subject, but I just hope it is not limited to a few cosmetic surgical strikes.
Do you think both countries, I mean, the loss of life would be just extraordinary? And obviously, the cultural ties are so significant.
There is no cultural tie worth talking about when blood is being shed on a regular basis by one side because the other side constantly uses the cultural tie to keep shedding blood. If the choice is between my people losing their lives in installments over years and sorting this out once and for all, I think I'm clear about the decision that we will not hand this over as a problem to the next generation as a legacy issue to deal with. We've been dealing with this for over 70 years. I think we need to put an end to this. Nobody likes to go to war. I think loss of life in a war is perhaps the most obvious thing to expect. But the question is it worth it? What is the price? What are the outcomes which justify going to war? And has it been thrust upon you? And if you don't act, what does it mean for you economically, politically, and optically? At this point, it is an unwilling war that has been thrust upon us. And when that happens, I think you must act with vengeance.
Do you think Pakistan will get aid from China?
Well, if it does, I think finally we will know that who is the Badzini who is actually supporting Tartaglia, to put it in the language of the Godfather. Okay, Pakistan has always been the silent hand which runs Pakistan. Rather, China has been the silent hand which runs Pakistan. That's been the case for quite some time. But this is not something that the Indian security establishment is unaware of. We've been aware of this for quite some time, since the 1960s at the very least. So should they come out with an idea to prosecute Pakistan for what it has done militarily, I'm sure they are aware of the possibility of a Chinese intervention, in which case they'll be ready for it.
This conversation's taken a turn I didn't expect, because obviously here you are, you're advocating for your position, but I'm sure there's still a lot of people that want to settle this diplomatically. So is there a way that this can be done? Maybe you target the army chief that potentially is advocating for these kind of killing of innocent civilians? I mean,
I'm perfectly comfortable taking out the entire top brass of the military of Pakistan and leaving the soldiers aside. I don't have a problem with it. But the response must be, they must at least be headless chickens. The heads must go, and heads must roll.
Now, obviously, I don't know if this is going to be Prime Minister Modi's final term in office, but certainly a lot of people think this could be. Is there natural leadership that would follow in line? I mean, I still am trying to piece together, okay, the political players who are likely to carry on the Modi legacy, if that's what the Indian people want.
I can't think of a single member of the ruling establishment at the center in India who thinks differently, other than going after Pakistan for what it has done. I think they speak in one voice. The civil society of India has also been agitated. And trust me when I say this, there's not a single conversation which I've had which is free of the reference to Pahalgam. Almost every conversation revolves around this. Every WhatsApp message, every post on X, on Instagram, it is only about this. You should just see the videos of the children asking where their parents are. And newlywed couples, where the newlywed wife is sitting next to the body of her husband, married for less than a week, right? When you look at all of that, I think you realize that this was completely unnecessary. On the one hand, you have voices from Pakistan asking for resumption of normalization of ties with India. And on the other hand, the military establishment does this. Then you realize that it's a good cop, bad cop game that's being played by Pakistan with India. There is no reason for us to extend the benefit of doubt to any arm of Pakistan, any institution of Pakistan, any section of Pakistan anymore. I don't belong to the Aman Ki Asha Peacenik Brigade. I never was, I never will be. Because sometimes you must realize that until an example is made out of this rogue state, others will take us for granted. And if Pakistan wants to be made an example out of for us to be able to climb the steps of the global ladder, we will step on its head nevertheless. I certainly am a hawk when it comes to this. I have no problems confessing to that.
And with the Pakistani voices that are claiming that they may not have had anything to do with this, that this was a false flag operation.
Yeah, the Pakistan always asks for evidence, and when provided with it, it refutes it. So I think this is a done to death trick. We have seen enough of this, and there's no reason for us to prove ourselves to Pakistan. It's not as if America decided to prove itself to either Afghanistan or Taliban with evidence before it decided to go after Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda. This is even worse. We have dealt with this beast for generations now. America sits tight, sits cozy, surrounded by oceans. That's not the case with us. We live in an extremely volatile neighborhood. So I don't think the rules of America or other countries apply to us. We are fighting a battle for our survival. We may be a large country, but the fact of the matter is we have troubles within and outside, and legacy issues which last for over 1,000 years, as Mr. Trump rightly points out.
So is this the start of World War III?
I hope not. I hope we quickly resolve this, and I don't think Pakistan should be given the dignity of being a part of a world war. Finish it once and for all and be done with it.
And how would Bangladesh respond on the other side, also with potential support from China as well?
At this point, you're looking at a trifecta or a trico of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, let's say Bangladesh, and China, of course. So I'm sure China will try and aid all those elements as much as possible. I would say that Bangladesh must realize that China will again run it into a debt trap. And two, with rising sea levels, Bangladesh has nowhere else to go but to come to India. Bangladesh happens to be one of the most low-lying countries in the world. And with climate change, it will be among the first countries to be affected severely. And if they have some sense and they value life over hatred, they must sit this one out. And they were banking on some establishments within the American state to support them under the Biden administration when the so-called regime change happened in Bangladesh. Since that administration is not in power anymore, perhaps they will tuck their tails and sit tight.
It's been a very sobering conversation. I do want to ask you finally about India's move towards becoming the third largest economy in the world. There's always been this push to have a $5 trillion economy. You're here in the U.S. We hear this from all the Indian leaders that come here. How do you accomplish that, knowing full well that these perils lie on your doorstep?
I don't think it's a zero-sum game. In fact, if we have to achieve that target, this issue has to be addressed. This pestilence and this pest needs to be exterminated before we can actually go ahead, because they will constantly throw hurdles and obstacles in our quest for economic prosperity. And they do so without any thought spared for the consequence that they are spending money at the expense of providing basic facilities for their own people. If they don't care for their people, why should we care for their people more than them? If at all, it's their people who must take it up with their establishment. They must perhaps start a revolution through the generals and do whatever it is. But they seem perfectly comfortable being led by a military establishment. For the better part of its existence, Pakistan has been run by a military establishment, either overtly or covertly. So that means somewhere the public supports it, because the public is the source of the anti-Hindu hatred and anti-India hatred that forms the basis of the Pakistani identity. And there is no reason to beat around the bush, because that is the basis of the two-nation theory. The madrasas, the seminaries, and every religious school in Pakistan teaches religious hatred under the assumption and on the basis that it is scripturally sanctioned, ordained, and obligated. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? And they start with the Pakistan's history, according to these idiots, starts from the 8th century with the invasion of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim, who was an Arab. This is the kind of multiple personality disorder that Pakistan suffers from. It looks for a father in Arabia. It looks for a father in Persia. It looks for a father in Turkey. It looks for a father in Kazakhstan, because it hates its own identity. The fact that it is of Indian origin is something that it hates. The fact that it's of Hindu origin, it hates. So this is the Stockholm syndrome at play across generations. How do you hope to have a rational conversation with these people? They hate their pre-Islamic history to such an extent that they want to Islamize their neighborhood. So the self-loathing that they have with respect to their ancestry, they project it onto the rest of us who have not been converted yet. To hope to deal with this kind of a mindset, this kind of a pathology and psychology, it's a psychopathic behavior. How do you hope to deal with this? Who does this to children? Who tells women, go and tell Modi, we've done this to your husbands? How do you hope to deal with this? I don't wish to have a conversation with these people across the negotiating table. I don't think it's even fairly possible.
But that being said, there are 200 million Muslims that live in India that I'm sure would be affected by warfare potentially on both fronts.
Why should Indian Muslims think of themselves as being affected by a war between India and Pakistan if their allegiance is to India?
Well, that's the question, right?
They should stand by their Hindu brothers and sisters of India. Assuming that Indian Islam is a different variant, which is what we're constantly being told, then they should stand with the Indian Hindus who are the victims of Pakistani terrorism, as opposed to Pakistani Islam, which perhaps is a very different brand of Islam compared to Indian Islam, if that is the assumption.
But is that the case? I mean, that, I guess, obviously.
That's for them to decide. That's for Indian Muslims to decide which side of the fence they are on. I proceed on the assumption that they are with us. If they have to prove me wrong, then I leave it to them. I hope that this is an irrebuttable presumption in the language of a lawyer. But if it's a rebuttable presumption, which means that my assumption that they're with us can be rebutted, then I think we have a larger issue to deal with. I hope that's not the case.
Very, very serious conversation, which I did expect, but my goodness, I don't think I've ever had a wartime conversation. I did interview a general once, but it's been a long time. Well, I certainly hope we have another conversation under better circumstances for the world, because certainly if India is...
Let's have a post-Pakistan conversation.
Sai Deepak, this is why, well, he has a huge following online. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ravi Kapur. I'm joined today by Mohandas Pai here at the Stanford India Conference, the second annual edition. And I've been watching this man speak for a number of years here domestically. And I was just telling him before we sat down that I think he might be the most outspoken venture capitalist out of India, at least that I've seen in recent years. And I think what's interesting is that you do advocate for your policy positions, and you have a very distinct interest in what happens in India and as it relates to the United States, certainly. So give me a sense. A lot has happened over the last few months where we have a new administration in the United States. Prime Minister Modi won a third term, not quite as large of a mandate as he had in the past. And now, as we are sitting down, we had a very large situation in Kashmir where we had terrorism outbreak, and we still don't know the ramifications, if, as of this filming, how India will fully react to that. So in light of all of these dichotomies, I mean, give me your thoughts on U.S.-India and where India's headed, because I know every time people, especially you're economically invested, former executive with Infosys, you have a real pulse on what's going on economically in India.
Well, I think with the Trump administration, global politics is fundamentally changed. There's going to be a reset in global politics led by the United States. The United States has to handle its fiscal deficit of $2 trillion a year, its trade deficit of $1.3 trillion, its debt of $36 trillion, its annual interest of $1.2 trillion going to $1.5 trillion. There's got to be something. It's got to cut the cost of government. It's got to cut the trade deficit. And President Trump is doing it in his own inimitable style. At the same time, China is being seen as the new hegemon of Asia, because the two power race in the world now, United States and China. And China is a very powerful beast, $20 trillion economy, not like the Soviet Union, which is smaller. It's got great advances in technology. We've seen in DeepSeek and everything else. It has spent nearly $1 trillion in the bridge and road initiative all over the world. And is willing to spend money and is in pretty good shape and is growing pretty fast. It grew 5% in the last quarter, right? In between, India is growing. We have $4 trillion. We have a prime minister who is very clear that he's there to look after the Indian national interest, like President Trump is looking after the U.S. interest. And if Indian national interest means that you have to play a role without unnecessarily taking sides with Europe on the Ukraine war, so be it. Because he's trying to promote peace in the world, and his focus is to grow India and make sure the Indians have a good quality of life and a better life than what they had much earlier. And we are faced with a terrorist nation in Pakistan. Pakistan sent terrorists across to kill six terrorists to kill innocent people. And they asked about the religion of everybody and asked them to recite the Islamic prayer. When they could not, they shot them because they happened to be Hindus. And we have to confront this monster. And I think Pakistan is war-born is scarred. And it has to suffer the repercussions. And Prime Minister Modi has gone on TV and spoken in English to say that he's going to pursue them and deliver justice to all the victims. And that's going to happen. And India is going to take strong action in Pakistan. As it is, we cut our diplomatic relationship with them. We're going to cut whatever economic relationships are there. We're going to keep the in the Indus Valley Treaty, Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, because much of the 5 rivers of the Punjab, 3 rivers go to Pakistan, they get 80% of the water. And we're going to make sure that we don't follow the treaty anymore, because the sweetheart deal given to Pakistan. And we're going to take action against terrorists who are based in Pakistan. And we had done it earlier when we sent our Air Force to bomb them and blew them up. And we're going to probably do many such things as it is. And I think it's the right thing to do, because how do you confront a nation which has terrorism as part of its foreign policy? It's a very serious issue. Just see what happened with Israel when October 7th happened. If any country dares to send terrorists to America, which is a neighboring country, and try to kill the citizens, how would America react? How would any country in Europe react? And nobody can preach peace to India, because India has always been a peacemaking nation. And I think the timing of that and what they're trying to do is something that we need to look into and debate. But I think the world is at a very different phase. And India-US is going to be the defining relationship of the 21st century. And the reason is very clear. US is a great democracy. India is the biggest democracy in the world. And both of us have a common interest in making sure that China doesn't become the hegemon of Asia. We want free movement on the seas. And we don't want Chinese influence to spread all over or to destroy anybody's industry. And China is the big beast and the hegemon. And I think we are perfectly aligned, except we won't be anybody's allies. because it doesn't suit our politics. But I think Prime Minister Modi is going to have deeper relations with the United States. We probably have a trade agreement where tariffs are going to be done, a free trade agreement with America. We're going to trade much more with America. We have a lot of people in America who are doing very well, and they've been model citizens. Indian Americans in America are one of the richest community, extremely well educated, extremely peaceful, contributing to the company, contributing to the United States like much more than most of the people. So I think it's a great time, and Prime Minister Modi is a realist, and he will take the election forward.
So, I mean, given your interest in having India's economic development increase, I mean, going into war, wouldn't that just put a halt on all that development?
I don't think we'll go into war. Everything short of war. We're not going to go into war.
What does that actually mean? That you're just a targeted strike, I guess, on their leadership, and then
there are many other ways to work. Many other ways to make Pakistan pay a price. One is international diplomacy. Now that President Trump and the whole world has condemned this terrorism, to make sure on the international stage we show them for what they are. Working with the Middle Eastern Muslim countries, Arab countries, to make sure that Pakistan, gets what it needs. The Arab countries have been funding them and funding their deficit for long, and making sure that they take note of this. I mean, we are friends with them, and they have an economic interest in us, and making sure that any business that happened between India and Pakistan through Dubai and other places is totally stopped. The movement of people is stopped. Any trade with them is stopped. Any cultural exchange with them is stopped, and hit them back in their own territory wherever we find terrorists, and let us see what they do.
So you don't think that a full war will break out?
No. I mean, this whole idea of this full war breaking out is ridiculous. And the idea for somebody to say Pakistan will retaliate with nuclear weapons is ridiculous. Please remember one thing. The Pakistani generals are having a great life. 35% of GDP of Pakistan is controlled by them. They're very rich, they're very corrupt, they're very fat. Right? They're making a lot of money doing business in Pakistan. They're in there in the army to make business. Pakistan is controlled by 50 families because they control the legislature, they control the land, they control their wealth, and they've taken away all their families and wealth to London, and they dominate London society through this, right? None of them want to lose their lives, right? If Pakistan thinks it can send a nuclear weapon to India, you think India is going to keep quiet? The retaliation will be multiple times what Pakistan does. Right? And you think the Americans are going to keep quiet if Pakistan wants to use its nuclear weapons? They're not going to keep quiet. They already know what it is. They control it. And they will do many things to make sure that it doesn't happen. I think all these are all bogeys. India will not have a war with any country. India will do many other things.
And so for the war hawks, which I just spoke to one, I just talked to Sai Deepak, and he was advocating for a full-fledged war. What do you have to say?
I think war is not an option. And Prime Minister Modi will never have a war. And he has told President Putin too that war is the 21st century. We cannot talk about war. We must talk about peace and try other means. Yes, we'll hit back, we'll retaliate in multiple ways, but it's not going to be war.
Are you concerned about Bangladesh, or what are you concerned about China?
We're not concerned about Bangladesh because Bangladesh has got a very jihadi Islamist government which is trying to play on the religious sentiments of its people, and they went against a former prime minister. They're terrorizing the Hindus and doing many things else. I think the world is concerned about China. Not because China can be a big security threat, we can defend ourselves, but China is a big economic threat to the world because China tries to dominate everybody's industry and try to create surpluses with every country without opening up its own market. It's a mercantilist economy which trades and uses government subsidies to subsidize trade without earning profits, and you can't fight that battle. Trade happens because people want to make money. Trade doesn't happen because people want to just grow revenues without making money. And that's the mentality. So I think it's an economic threat, and the economic hegemony of China, that's the biggest threat.
What do you make of the U.S.-India relationship with this administration versus the Biden administration?
Well, the Biden administration was partially hostile in whatever it did to India. They're hostile. The Trump administration appears to be much more friendly to India. And I think the Trump administration understands the role of India. They don't have ideology blinkers, and I think they will really be closer to India and have a free trade agreement with India.
So I've been hearing you speak for many years now, and why are you so outspoken? Most people who have this many investment interests, and the kind of job that you had before, where you are running one of the biggest conglomerates in India, why have you decided to be so public about your own policy stances?
Well, we got to be public because we need better policy for India. and there's a asymmetry of views between what people want. The government of India is behind what policy requirements are there to take India to a $10 trillion economy. We have to speak up. We have to find out areas where we need better policies, better things, and we have to communicate to the government. So I think it's better to be outspoken and have a good debate. I don't think there's anything wrong in being outspoken or being honest about what needs to be done.
And what do you make of the government's initiatives? I mean, the Make in India initiative. I know
These are great initiatives. Make in India is required because we have to incentivize industry to make in India what it could do, because there's some disadvantages because supply chain issues. So we need some government investment. It's happening, creating a huge amount of jobs. We are seeing a large rise in export of electronic components. We're seeing Apple come here. I think we're seeing a large impact of work which were done years ago. And I think these are all very good policies which are helping India, creating jobs, creating more industries. And I think for the first time we have a government which believes that the future of India lies with India itself and not with China.
Is there something that's lacking in the policy that you'd like to see them to implement?
Yes, lacking is we have got too many regulations, too many things which inhibit economic freedom to invest and to work with the world. And that we have to reduce, because we need policies for a $4 trillion economy to take us to $10 trillion. We have policies for a $1 trillion economy now, and that cannot work for a $4 trillion economy. So we have to upgrade all our policies, and that has to work. And I think government has to step up the pace to give us what we want, because we are growing at adding $400 billion to GDP every year, 15% of the incremental GDP every year. Between India, China, and the United States, 70-75% incremental GDP is being added. And India is the major player. So we need all the things to happen. If we don't do that, it holds us back. Holds us back in foreign exchange, our use of overseas investment coming in, too many regulations, too many controls, which we had to give up.
And for people who might be watching this thinking, okay, well, India sounds like a tremendous growth story, but fearful of some of these other domestic and international challenges.
Look, India has grown from $275 billion GDP in 1991 to $3.9 trillion in 2025, 8.11% a year for 34 years. Come on, give me a break. If the growth is there. In the last 30 years, the two best stock markets in the world have been US and India. Last 30 years. 5 years US, 5 years India. India has done tremendously well. India has got huge amount of good quality human capital. Its physical infrastructure is going up. Its financial capital is going up. It's the industry on the march. We invest $1 trillion in capex every year. $1 trillion. How many countries invest $1 trillion in the world? China, US, and India. And that's only increasing at 10-11% a year. See, the great growth story, consumption is 60% of the GDP, government is 10% of GDP, is a country driven by internal consumption and partial exports and partial infrastructure development. A lot of things are happening. And Indian corporate management is world class. Our corporate governance standards are world class. You come to India and talk to businesses and ask them for the strategy. You'll be surprised at the quality of the strategic thinking they have and the execution they have and the quality of the products and what is happening. We export $235 billion of software, the highest in the world for any country in software services. We'll have more software engineers in Bangalore than California. We have 2.5 million software engineers in Bangalore, 1.5 million in California. And Bangalore is the hotbed of innovation in the world. And if you look at all these things happening, we need better infrastructure. We are just investing now for the last 10 years. But I think unbelievable things are happening in this country. If you're not there, you miss all the action.
Well, this is why I wanted to sit down with you. You're one of the best evangelists for India that I've seen.
Thank you.
Pai, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good talking to you.
You too.